long day, I got a lot to say. It feels like I'm carrying a 2-ton weight. I go to see a friend.
Hello, I'm Msgr Patrick Winslow.
And I am Father Matthew Kauth.
And we are speaking from the rooftop.
A podcast brought to you by 10 Books, in which we invite you to join our conversation out here in the open air,
where we look out upon the world around us from the rooftop of the church and share with you what we see.
Makes me wanna scream from the rooftop to the screen till I know.
Well, hello there.
Well, hello, Msgr Winslow. Welcome back.
Well,
it's good to see you.
Yes.
Sometimes I feel like we only see each other when we do these.
I think it's become that at this stage in the game. I sometimes think about, in the morning, I want to do this, I want to do that. And by 3/4 of the way through the workday, I just want to go home.
I just want to go home.
And even then, I don't know what it's just a slow roll to bed. It's not exciting.
No. I think to myself that there was a time in my life where a meal could happen at like 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Or you could think about going out at that point or anything. I look at pastoral responsibilities and opportunities and invitations. I look at the time first.
I do too. I absolutely do. I look at the time and then I look at the recliner chair.
Can't we have that talk
I'm
at
trying
noon?
to balance all these things out. All right. As far as the topic then, beyond our challenges with sloth after a full day's work, discouragement. I think many people battle discouragement. I think many people get to a point where it's hard, the need to persevere. Not the need to persevere, but the act of perseverance becomes so fatiguing for various reasons. And I think it's just worth talking about some of those reasons. And I'll launch, one line of thinking.
Sure.
But obviously there are many reasons why fatigue can set in relative to one's faith life and consequently eat away at one's ability to persevere and thus feel discouraged and held back. So I think that as Catholics...
Is this a window into your soul right now, by the way, or...
No, I'm going to talk about a friend of mine.
A friend of yours.
A friend of mine.
Let's talk about... It's Father Gober. Okay.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
He's probably walking, listening to this podcast right now. So.
Yes. In fact, we need to tell our folks here that we said we were going to do some especially long podcasts so that he would keep walking.
He'd get a longer walk in.
Yeah, a longer walk in. But then he told us in return that he would just put us on pause.
Fair enough.
So that's not going to go. All right. Discouragement and some of my initial thoughts. And I hope it's not too heady, but I think it's quite realistic and practical. I feel like part of what discourages us is some of the same tension that brought about Luther's Reformation. And what I mean by that is when you recognize the beauty of the gospel, the truth of the gospel, we're inspired to follow, we're inspired to move forward, we're moved. But as our ascent to faith leads us, our own foibles and faults, sinfulness, iniquities, they drag us behind. And we experience an enormous lag between the faith we profess and in certain areas of our life that is dragging well behind that. And initially, there may be some great first fervors where that gap is narrow, or you're led to believe that you're on a trajectory and it's going to close very quickly.
Yes. We're almost there.
You're almost there, right? But in time, the weight and the depth of those iniquities really set in, and some of the first fervors have now transitioned into that journey of faith that requires a growing of that muscle of faith, if you will. And we begin now to struggle. There's a struggling with regret of the past. There's struggling with why I'm confessing the same things over and over again, why I can't move the ball. And over the arc of time, we start to think maybe it's not possible. And in some cases, I think people become led to believe or be tempted to believe, as Luther did, which is that we are just these broken, sinful balls of flesh that will never be cured. And Christ is the answer. And as everyone knows, he would just cover us over with his grace. And so that's that. You profess him as your Lord and Savior. You've contractually now locked in for your own salvation, and you do your best after that. And this is just, I can see the temptation of Luther. I can see that temptation because of that dynamic of having certain parts of one's life lag behind what they believe and profess. I could certainly feel that temptation, but in the end, that is obviously not what we believe to be true, and it's intellectually unsatisfying, and it's realistically unsatisfying. It is not the right set of answers. And the other extreme is a belief that just because you assent to these things, therefore you abide by them entirely. And it's not necessarily true. You have to, of course, if it were that easy, sign me up. I'll take the test, get 100, and I'm done.
Right.
But that's not it either. So we are caught in that space in between of reality. And it leads to an experience for many people of discouragement along a long journey of faith that we realistically deal with. So I'll leave it at that. I know you must have a few thoughts, but I want to kind of talk about, how you reframe that in your mind, how to see it and contextualize it properly. On the one hand, to recognize some good, and then on the other hand, to recognize some bad ways to frame it so that you don't get stuck in that trap of despair. Things like that.
Well, I think it's a fantastic topic, and I realize now you're not talking about Father Gober, because to become discouraged, you would have had to try.
That was a good one.
As you were describing, I'm like, no, that's not him.
No. So that's another show.
I remember when I was teaching the guys about fortitude for the first time. So every year, since the guys are here for 4 years, we go through one of the cardinal virtues together. And I had never really studied that particular virtue. And I was really sort of shocked by Thomas's presentation on that. Just insofar as you think about fortitude and you think about strength. And the word itself sort of means, kind of having strength. And when I think of strength being a choleric, I think of conquering something. I think of attacking something. In this discussion, it's attacking, yourself in the sense of those things in me that are fallen, that need purification, that need to be changed, etc. And I like that idea. I like going on the attack and saying, this is going to be rooted out from me. And I was surprised in his presentation when, in the Summa, when Thomas said that the virtue of fortitude is much more about endurance than it is attack. Rarely is it attack. It's endurance. And he uses the example of a city gate or wall that gets battered over and over and over and eventually yields. And he's sort of for Thomas anyway, almost tender in the fact of saying, the fact that it yielded does not mean that you didn't have fortitude. Eventually the gate yields, and then you build it again and you endure.
Interesting.
And I think that's the kind of warp and woof of our life, that instead of just going on the attack, because you're pretty much going to fail by just, the white knuckling, the grinning, and, it's not that we don't do anything, but so much more of our life is about what he calls a passive purification. That I am meant to endure, but I'm not meant to save myself. And because I can't, I'm just going to fall and fail. And so the older I get, the more I, because precisely perhaps of my own inabilities and failures, seeing how much dependence I have on him purifying me. And that's what I mean by a passive purification. It's not, I can't go at it, a lot of things, and just make it happen. I have to wait on him and endure and pray, etc. And you see it in spades in the seminary. Because when a man comes into the seminary, everyone says there's nothing greater than a college seminary to get yourself some zeal. Because they just got in.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bishop of Mexico City, he's deceased. He managed to be up for canonization. He's a brilliant, beautiful, holy man. Last name was Martinez, Bishop Martinez. And he has a number of different books out, but one of the books was on the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And you've probably heard this analogy before, that you and I can grow in natural virtue by repeated acts of volition. So I can grow in a little bit of fortitude by repeated acts of, hunkering down.
You get stronger.
Getting stronger, et cetera.
Yeah.
As you do when you're playing a sport or dieting or anything else, right? A little bit goes a long way, and you keep making acts of volition.
It builds and you get stronger and stronger.
He says, and that's fine, but imagine if you were rowing across the ocean. It's like, you just get tired and your hands start bleeding. And the gifts of the Holy Spirit are likened unto, instead of rowing, throwing up a sail and catching the wind. And when the men come in, their sails are full. Like they are billowing, and they make real progress real fast. And then the wind dies. Certainly by the time they get to theology, the wind sort of sets. And they're rowing, and they're finding that they're not making much progress, or they fall back into things that they thought they had conquered, etc. And that thing happens to us priests, and certainly the lay faithful as well. And it's discouraging. It's terribly discouraging. But in part because you had such sense of, I'm setting out on the high seas and the wind is in my face and I'm making serious progress, and I've got lots of devotion. I'm flying. And all of a sudden it's the noonday sun that's bearing down on you, and there's no wind, and your hands are chapped and bleeding. And it's like, I'm not making any progress. Should I pick up the oars? So I get what you're saying, totally. I think
that type of fatigue, that type of discouragement, I'm not sure we talk about it enough, because I do think it's experienced by so many people. Yeah. In the pews, by priests, by religious, by everybody. And it is such an integral part of that passive purification that we endure in life.
I think that Satan is always, not to blame all this on him, but I think he's always in the shadow around the corner, waiting for that moment of discouragement, of despair.
And that's the very serious risk that discouragement has. Yeah. Because on the one hand, you can feel the fatigue, but on the other hand, you don't want to go down the slippery slope of discouragement into the pit of despair. Yep. And that's where I think some strategies can be helpful. So, for example, some of the things you just said about, the sail, catching the wind of the Holy Spirit, if you will, and the gifts of the Holy Spirit, for those times in which that's available to catch. But there are those times where there doesn't appear to be any wind to catch. You're in the middle of the ocean. There's no land on any side of you, and you just have rows. You just have these oars for you to row by. What do? And that's where you really get into that perseverance. That's where you get into, one stroke at a time, moving forward and forward and forward. It's an act of faith. Yep. And I think having that mindset of understanding that this happens is itself a benefit. Absolutely. Because you can frame it, and you don't have to feel like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay here until I die of the heat or a shark eats me. Yep. Right? That's the despair. Yep. But no, you actually can move. And the little movement, although it may not seem heroic, may actually be closer
Absolutely.
to heroic
Absolutely.
than any other grand gesture at any other
That's
time.
right. I totally agree with you. When you are on the ground, not because you've chosen to kneel, but because you can't stand up, as Lewis once said, that's a moment of real merit if you don't quit the game.
You don't quit. Yeah. That's a true, profound act of faith.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that helps me in moments like that is I try to get really small, and sort of almost like a Theresian childlikeness, where, as one author I like very much said, you have no foothold. You recognize you have no foothold. You're not standing on anything solid. And so there's a kind of abandonment to him. But then I like to do simple things of devotion at that point. Like, literally, I know that I can walk over to a statue of Our Lady and put a kiss on her feet. I know I can bring a flower to the statue of Our Lady over at Belmont Abbey or something. I know I can make a visit to the Blessed Sacrament and stay on my knees for 5 minutes. Just some acts of devotion and piety that place me before him. It's like, I'm stuck.
Right.
I'm just stuck. So this is me sort of half rowing, knowing that the wind is going to change, that the weather is going to change, and time helps a lot too, because you've been there before. As my mother always says, the elevator goes down and then it goes back up.
Yeah.
And to know that it's going to go back up.
Yeah.
And it does, but you have to persevere. But going back to that point you mentioned, the difference between discouragement and despair, that's a really important distinction, because we talk about despair as a sin against hope, and maybe this is the moment at which you can finally talk about your little girl Hope.
Press my buttons.
I know.
Absolutely. Well, this poem written by Charles Pegee, and I think we probably have
we touched on it once,
about it. So Charles Pegee, just to remind everyone, was really a product of the Enlightenment at the turn of from the 1800s into the 1900s. French. He served in World War I. He was a writer, a poet, and at some point comes to the faith of his culture, which is Catholicism, right? He comes to his Catholic faith. He was an atheist. He was very much an adherent to the Enlightenment movements, the moving away from God, doing away with the necessity of God in thinking, and so on and so forth. But he comes to his faith, not because it was the faith of his childhood, but he comes to it honestly from those Enlightenment atheist positions. And he begins to write poetically on a number of things, and he chose the supernatural virtues of faith, hope, and love. And so he has these poems that are written in French, but they are translated into English, and they are a type of poetry that lends itself to translation because it's more of a poetry of images. It's not like one of these rhyme scheme things. And they're long. They're about like 100 to 150 pages long. So they're like small essays in prose, if you will. So he talks about these three supernatural virtues as three women. The spouse, faith, hope, and love. Yeah, so the spouse, the wife, she is the image of faith. Love is the motherly figure. And then you have the daughter, the young girl, who is hope. And he refers to them as walking together in this journey that is life. And he says in the end that hope, she walks a longer path than charity and faith, because she doesn't walk in a straight line. She rather, as is the nature of hope, flits around with delight and runs through the hems of the skirts of the other matronly woman and runs in circles, all the while keeping up with them. So she's actually walking a longer distance, although they walk together. And he's making allusions to, like, the parable, for example, of the prodigal son, that charity and faith leave the son who departs from the father. They depart from him, but hope continued on. And that hope made a longer journey and was there when he was finally with the swine. It was nascent, but then became more present. And so that hope dared to go where faith and charity couldn't tread. And that light of hope in that darkness then became that little girl that ran a longer distance to be with him in that moment where the other ladies were too far away.
That's beautiful.
And it's really just extremely beautiful to consider that. And he goes on and he talks about how the father in the field who works and tills the ground and his calloused hands and works in the heat of the day, that he does a tremendous amount of work, but he poses the question, who does more work? The father in the field who is working and laboring, or the little girl playing at home? And he proposes it's the little girl playing at home, because the father would stop working in the field. He would stop getting calluses on his hands if it weren't for the fact that he was driven by her to provide for her. And so now he's seeing hope as this inspiring element.
Almost as if she's stronger, maybe. I mean, maybe he's working in this case.
She's more powerful because she's harnessing his
was
power.
Driving him on.
And moving him and inspiring him.
I have a vague recollection of you going through that. There was a scene as well where with these two larger, more mature women, older women of faith and charity, and then she has a little girl at some point grabs their hands and she's in between them.
Yes.
And she kind of, as kids will do,
swing.
When they're excited to go see something, they swing, but they might even like want to make them run or to drive them
pull
on,
them forward.
kind of pulling them, as it were. Because it's true.
Yes.
If, the beauty of faith, of course, is that it's a beautiful line I once read. It's God's own self-knowledge in our frail minds. We see him, we know him it's inchoate, it's just a beginning, it's a foretaste, but we do know him. And because we know him, we can love him. But if you knew him and you had no hope of attaining him, right? Then it doesn't matter. It only makes it worse.
Right.
It only makes it worse.
Absolutely.
Because Satan knows him on some level, right?
Yeah. But that work of hope, it's muscular, I think oftentimes we throw the word around as though are akin to wishful thinking.
Yeah.
And it's not, because that's just too up for chance.
Yep.
That's too wimpy.
Yeah, the Pollyanna.
And not muscular. Whereas the supernatural gift of hope for us has a weight of certainty.
Yeah.
And is muscular. It pulls you through the dark times.
Right.
That's, hope sweats. It works. It's laborious.
Yep.
In the sense that it pulls its weight and yours. And I think that we misunderstand hope and its importance in the life of the faith if we just see it as inspirations.
I totally agree. There was a wonderful homily. I was in St. Peter's many moons ago, in the beginning of Advent, when I was studying there, and Pope Benedict, I think it was Vespers actually, and he gave for the opening of Advent, and he gave a beautiful homily at the Vespers, and it was about how hope has that notion of something that is not yet, right? Kind of already, but not yet. It's sort of embryonic. participation in something. And he said, what if there is nothing in the future? What then happens to your present? And he used the example of a woman, obviously relative to Advent, that's pregnant. It's the future possession of her child that fills her present with excitement.
Right.
But when you literally have nothing to look forward to,
expectation,
your present is empty.
Yes.
Just as the father would stop working,
right,
if there wasn't hope, to whom he went in the end of the evening and brought the fruit of his labors, and watched her face, with the doll he bought her, or the food that he brought, or even just planting her kisses on his face.
Right.
I mean, that motivates him. It's something in the future, even though we're sort of, but it's present because that's what's motivating us now.
So I felt this actually in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I may have told you this in the past. No one knows, I may have talked about it on this podcast, but by way of a refresher, or in case I haven't, there was a time back when I was in seminary, and I saw something happening at a mass that was bothersome to me. And at that point, I knew that the priest should have known better. So in my mind, it's like, yeah, you're just being, capricious and willful and doing things that you're not supposed to do. And, who are you? And it started to kind of incite a little bit of anger in me, a little bit of indignation. Of course, as you're a seminarian and you're learning all these things, this is one of the early pitfalls, is, to sit there as a bit of a judge on such matters and to get indignant a little bit on the sidelines. Sure. So I was at that stage in the seminary process, and somewhere in my thinking, I took a bit of a turn, and I started imagining, and I have no idea why I did this, but I started imagining him before God. This priest who I thought was doing something that was, I think, offensive to the community, the unity of the community, because he was basically doing liturgical abuses. And I thought, as he stands before God, that's no sin or no violation against others is going to go very well. and so I started having sympathy, because I was now worried about him.
Yeah.
Like a genuine care. And clearly he didn't see what he was doing was being bad, and maybe felt justified, whatever. But the way I was seeing it, I started having sympathy for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so in one fell swoop, I think I felt the gift of hope alter my view of reality in the present. Because faith tells me what will happen in the future, that we will all have to account before God. And that future reality of that account was now being, I was allowed to see through the eyes of faith, and was now imported to the present, which gave me a type of living hope that all things will be rectified in the end. And I was no longer becoming sour or angry or, annoyed. And I was actually concerned about the guy.
Yeah.
And everyone else.
Yeah.
And it altered my perception of reality. And I felt like this is that muscle of hope that's pulling the future known by faith into the present, that alters the present. And my perspective was completely altered. Not completely, but substantially altered.
I remember having a conversation with you. It must be 30 years ago now, close to it. We were at the Franciscan monastery, and we were talking about, it was probably something consequent upon that line of that the mercy with which you dole out is going to be, given back to you, or something to that effect. And us having a realization when we were there praying that okay, I don't want to hold anything against anyone.
Right.
because right now everyone is free. I'm freeing everyone from any difficulty that I'm holding them up for a measure of justice. But I want the same in return.
Yeah, exactly.
And it changes you.
I mean, even a selfish motivation.
Absolutely,
to be merciful.
It might be a good start.
It's a good start.
Because you feel the same way. You're going to stand before God with this.
Bringing what we know to be in the future, something like that.
Yeah.
I think there's something about that muscle of hope that pulls it into the present and changes the way we see.
And for all things, it's so true, and how unbelievably swift life's course is. And it's one of the reasons that people say it's morbid, but it's oftentimes, right? But it is one of the reasons that the saints often meditated upon death. Mm-hmm. Not because it just, you better not cry, you better not pout, because the Lord's watching you, and when you get to that moment, that's bam.
No, it's wise.
But it's wise, and this is the purpose of my life.
It's real.
To be able to get to that moment and say, I forgive everyone, but B, I have confidence in your forgiveness. And there's a wonderful line in St. Paul talking about the weight of suffering, that it's the minuscule weight of suffering. I remember looking this up way back when we were in seminary. The thlipsis, the kind of suffering, and that gives way to the eternal weight of glory. I remember that. So that, about that, it's like this infinitesimal thing that we're suffering now in comparison to the weight of glory, if we'll just hold on and be confident in Him.
That's right.
And the line of T.S. Eliot, I think he's quoting Julian of Norwich, I like to remind myself, all will be well in all manner of things, will be well. Not easy when you're out in the middle of the ocean and you're rowing, but...
So you may feel discouraged, but don't despair.
Yeah.
Understand the context and, recognize that this is part of the process of faith. Yep. This is the way it goes.
Do what you can. Mm-hmm. Lean on your friends, and especially in the faith community. Laugh at yourself. Be okay with the fact that you're a buffoon and your failures at times, and that's okay.
Yep. It's a bit like being, for those who have experience of doing weightlifting, toward the end of toward the end of the repetitions where your muscles are just about to give out, where they're like, it cannot lift another pound and everything is going to collapse. Well, that's a pretty impressive moment to be at.
Yeah.
Because it took a lot of work to get there. And so oftentimes where you feel these moments where you're discouraged, that's kind of where you are.
Yeah.
But you just lose sight of the fact. All you can feel is that you can't even lift 1 pound, right? But in reality, you couldn't have gotten there.
Yeah.
Apart from all that you did.
All that you did.
To break it down to
Amen.
That point.
That's right.
So you are much farther along than you realize. And have that context and have that larger perspective is so important.
That's a good point. I was laughing because you reminded me once again of Father Gober. But
have
you ever lifted with him?
Does he? Has he ever lifted?
Well, in high school we did.
Oh,
but then I've gone with him over the years, here and there, the gym, whatever else. And he's so funny when, like, if a trainer or I say to him, "Okay, we're gonna lift this thing to fail." What fail to him means I'm halfway there, and
it hurts.
I've got to preserve. I feel it.
I feel it,
and I've got to preserve enough in case we have to do more reps later on. So fail is always like I feel it.
Yes.
So for the rest of us,
fail was I can't go any farther.
You can't go any farther.
Yeah.
The wall, the gate gives way.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And that's when our blessed Lord is there in spades.
Yeah. He needs a unique spiritual director to help him through these.
Oh, he's not going to like this one. But his parishioners will.
Well, we're going to get a text after that one. That's
Amen.
True. All right, so what's the before you go thing?
I have to say, every year I get shocked. Every single
year. As in surprised?
By autumn. Yeah. And specifically because every year I say to myself, oh no, we had too much water. Or we had too much heat,
not gonna look nice,
or we had too much whatever. And it just looks brown and dead. We're going to miss fall this year. It's my favorite season. It's not going to happen. Of course, as I speak right now, I'm looking out, over the fields here, and it's exquisite. The colors are all popping now in sort of explosive fireworks. And I don't know why I fall for it every year. Every year I think it's not going to happen. But every year it does.
Well, it's...
I mean, some years are better than others.
You're just afraid. It's just a
some years are better than others. I never want to miss it.
That's it. You're afraid you're going to miss it.
Yeah.
Well, I guess on that same line, I was up recently in New York and then into Massachusetts. I went to see my niece who dives for University of Rhode Island. And she was competing.
She dives?
Yes.
Okay.
What did I say?
I heard dies.
No, dives. Sorry.
No, it's not you. It's just my
dives.
Ears. I'm old.
For University of Rhode Island. And they were competing up at Northeastern in Boston. So I wanted to see her because I haven't seen her dive at the collegiate level. So it was a lot of fun. On the way there was amazing and beautiful foliage.
The Northeast,
trees were on fire.
The Northeast is exquisite, isn't it?
It was unbelievable. Yeah. Just exquisite. I mean, you see things that were red. I mean, red and bright yellow and orange. I mean, even me, I grew up there. I'm in my 50s now, and I wanted to take a photograph.
Yeah.
You just don't get used to that.
Yeah, you don't. And it didn't have to happen. One more wink, one more sign from our Lord, just to keep you.
Oh, it's just utterly beautiful. And by the way, my niece, she did an amazing job. Yeah, she's quite.
Did you dive next to her?
I taught her everything she knows.
I would imagine. Yeah. I could see you up there, like.
But she, first of all, I don't know if you remember going on like a 1 meter board, just a 1 meter. But that's the lowest board, right? A 1 meter board, because of your height, Right. So say you're 6 feet tall, where your eyes are, you look out over. Your eyes are about.
Yeah, you're 9 feet up.
Yeah. And that seems high. So then she's, also on the 3 meter board. So that's 15 feet off the ground, plus where your eyes are. And in this competition, there was just those two boards, but she has gone off these 10 meter platforms.
No.
I can't even imagine it. But I mean, she's just like fearless. Whereas I can't even get close to the edge on the 3 meter board without being terrified of falling. Yeah. No less, a platform.
Well, I think we all have the memory of the first time we took swim lessons or went to the pool, and we went from the low board to the high board. And you can't, and how many kids back up and go back down the stairs?
The knees buckle.
You're the loser kid that went back down the stairs.
Yeah, no.
Because you're also seeing through the water.
Well, that's right.
To the lines down beneath, right?
So I do remember on occasion sitting at the edge of the board and rolling off. I closed the gap, All right.
Well, have a great week, everyone. God bless you all.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Makes me wanna scream from the rooftop to the screen.
Thanks for listening to this episode of From the Rooftop.
For updates about new episodes, special guests, and exclusive deals for From the Rooftop listeners, sign up at rooftoppodcast.com.
And remember, for more great ways to deepen your faith, check out all the spiritual resources available at tanbooks.com.
And we'll see you again next time.
From the Rooftop.
Anywhere.